From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Doc Staples with Unconquered podcast, with the Unconquered podcast. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. By Louis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. By Shenandoah Newsma of ShenRealEstate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. And by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. And y'all, this is the first time in a while that we've talked about an ACC win. First time in 10 ACC games that Florida State has managed to come away with a win. It's hard to believe. I mean, you realize that over the same stretch, SMU is 12-1 in the ACC. Duke has won 5 straight road games in the ACC. And Florida State is 1-9 in their last 10. 2 and 12 in their last 14 ACC games. It's insane what world we're living in college football. The where we are right now is just so unrecognizable. I mean, it's just not where things were 5 years ago. 10 years ago. If you told people 10 years ago that SMU would be 12-2 in their, or 12-1 in their last 13, it's either 12-1 or 12-2 in their last 13 or 14 games in the ACC. Yeah, it's 1 because they lost their first. Yeah, so they're 12-1 in their last 13 games in the ACC. First of all, 10 years ago that it's SMU's in the ACC. But that Duke is beating Clemson at Clemson for their 5th straight ACC road win. That Georgia Tech is leading the conference. Virginia is 7-1 in the conference. Or 7-1 and what, 4-1 in the conference? I mean, guys, this is bizarro world. But nevertheless, if you're from the Florida State side of things, this is a pretty good Saturday. Miami of Florida goes to SMU and loses in overtime on a egregiously late throw by Carson Beck that gets intercepted. Whew, that was bad. So Miami of Florida continues to have their struggles in November under Mario Cristobal. It is crazy. I mean, the ACC network posted a graphic that Mario Cristobal in August through October, since he's taken the Miami job, they're 24-7. That's a 77.4% win percentage. But in November and December, they're 4-11. That's a 26.7% win percentage. Wow. I think we just need to start calling Mario Cristobal Mr. November. Woo. Wow. All Canes conference, right? Yet another year where it looks like Miami of Florida is not going to be in the ACC championship game. It's just the way that it goes. And, look, if that's number 1. Number 2, Florida loses in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, 24-20 against Georgia. And Georgia, I mean, they just are not the same right now. I mean, you talk about one of those teams that has out-recruited everybody. It's Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. And Georgia, despite out-recruiting everybody, there's something missing there. They just have not been the same team this year. They should have another loss. I mean, that team should have lost to Tennessee. Nevertheless, they still beat Florida, so Florida loses. Miami of Florida loses. And then Clemson loses on their home field to a Duke squad that came in there and scored 46 points on them. And then had the stones to go for it and go for 2 at the end of regulation instead of putting it into overtime. And they got it. They had the right 2-point call. Got the 2-point conversion and went out and seized the win. Good for the Fighting Manny Diaz's. So, I mean, guys, you pair that with a big Florida State win, and your three biggest rivals all went down, and then you went out and won 42-7 against a Wake Forest team that nobody had beaten, nobody had blown out, nobody beaten like that all season. So, yeah, that's a pretty good weekend for Florida State fans who have not had a good weekend in a good long while. And look, we could, pour some a little healthy dose of reality on this, and we will a little bit during this, because I do think that the final score was maybe not as indicative of how well Florida State played, as, Wake Forest also found ways to step all over themselves in this game and make some very key mistakes that kept this game from being closer. And ultimately Florida State broke the dam, and then things just, spiraled from there. But that's college football. I mean, that's what we've been talking about the last few weeks that have gone the opposite direction. Florida State has been the team that has made those mistakes, that has, done just the wrong thing at the wrong situational time, and it's cost them. And I think that's one of the reasons that this FSU team has been one of the most hot and cold teams in the country. I mean, they went out there and they beat and, dominated arguably the best team in the country. I mean, right now, if you were going to handicap the college football playoff, I don't think anybody's betting against Alabama. I mean, Ohio State and Alabama are the class of the country right now. And, Indiana being the other. Those are the three best. Those have been the three best teams that have played all season. And Florida State beat the brakes off of Alabama, partly because they came in and they did get some breaks from Alabama. Alabama had some opportunities. They missed in those key situations, and then FSU took advantage and ran away with the game. And then in the other Power 4 matchups this season, Florida State was in position to seize wins, go out there and do it. And each time they failed situationally. They weren't able to recover a fumble, or they fumbled something key away, or they came up just short on this or that. It's been the way that the season has gone all year. A key penalty at the wrong time, any number of things. Well, today, that shoe was on the other foot. And Wake Forest went out and did that. And this is a Wake Forest team that hasn't done that against anybody. Again, Wake Forest's 2 losses this year came by 10 points to NC State and 1 point to Georgia Tech. Nobody had blown this team out. Not this season. This was a team that had been able to keep every game close, and they were a team that was really a hard team to knock out. That's something that we talked about in the pregame. And Florida State came in and just flat knocked them out. They flattened them in the third quarter. They knocked them on the mat, and that was it. Final three quarters, Florida State scored 14, 14, and 14 and gave up 7 only in the fourth quarter after a strip sack of Brock Glenn. That was Brock Glenn's fault, by the way. I mean, people are going to blame the left tackle there, but that was an RPO. And as a quarterback, when your offensive line is run blocking, you can't pull the ball and then just sit there and wait. You can't do it. If you pull it, you got to get it out. And if you're not getting it out, you can't get it out late. So, that's what happens. And that, of course, prevents the shutout. It's two shutouts this year. 2 spiked baseballs this year that Florida State's had a chance to have that have been sabotaged by a backup quarterback fumbling the football. Jeez. I'd be pretty ticked off if I were the defense, honestly. But either way, one thing I will say is I think all accounts or everything, all indications are, I think I was wrong in my assessment last week that this team has quit on Mike Norvell. I think I was wrong about that. Now, the question is whether or not they sort of soft quit on him last week, and then he managed to get him back. But this team still cares. They still went out there and they were still celebrating with Mike Norvell. I mean, this is a bunch of guys that like him. Now, I do think that a big part of the problem is that these are a bunch of guys that love their coach. They love Mike Norvell, but they don't fear him. And that's something that, is a hard balance to find as a coach. You want your players to both love and fear you. And I'm not sure they fear Mike Norvell. In fact, I'm pretty confident they don't fear Mike Norvell. But I do think they love him, and I do think they played hard for him today. And I do think that it matters to them that they go out there and don't make him look worse than he has. It's just too bad it hasn't, that impetus or that particular motivation hasn't been as steady as it should be. But looking at the game, I mean, this was a pretty dominant performance. Florida State averaged 7.4 yards per play and only gave up 3.5. 2.1 yards per rush against Wake Forest. And in the pregame, what did we talk about? The thing that they basically are going to depend on is they're going to try to run the football. You got to stack the box, force them to beat you downfield because you don't think that their quarterbacks can do it. And their quarterbacks definitely couldn't do it. I mean, Robbie Ashford, 12 of 21, 93 yards and a pick. Deshaun Purdy, 6 of 10, 69 yards and that one touchdown, which was on the short field. Total of 18 of 21 for 162 yards. That's not really getting it done a bunch. And, average per completion of 9 yards. Average per pass, even worse, right? So that's, average yards per attempt passing, 5.4. That's dominant. Average yards per attempt, by the way, for Florida State, 20.7, which is ridiculous. Against a defense, by the way, in Wake Forest that had not given up big plays all season. That's the one thing they'd done really, really well is they had not given up big plays. They gave up 10 for 313 yards today. Florida State was able to get to the second level, and their playmakers were just better than what Wake Forest had on the field. Mostly Deuce Robinson, 5 catches for 148 yards, averaged 29.6 yards per catch, 5 catches on 8 targets. That's pretty good. And then you add Mekhi Danzy, 2 catches for 67, including that 66-yarder. Those two guys averaged combined over 30 yards per catch. That's healthy. And against a team, again, that had not given up big plays in the passing game. Then in the run game, you got some chunks. Sam Singleton got the start, and honestly, he played really well. He was a guy that I think when they went back and they evaluated and they self-scouted during the bye week, they said, he's got, in terms of big plays, he's had the most juice. And, he showed that in this game. He was the guy that was able to get the biggest, busting the plays upfield, get into the second level and, create some yardage. He hit the hole maybe a little quicker than anybody else. Of course, Chroma is a guy that I still think they underuse at this point. 4 carries for 19 yards. Pretty good. But, I think ultimately you're going to want to give him more than 4 carries. But I think offensively, this was a very much a get back on track type game for Florida State against a good defense. I mean, this Wake Forest team has had a good defense all season. Now, in their loss against NC State, that defense sort of wore down in the second half, and I think that's what happened here to some degree. I mean, if you look at the quarter and half cumulatives, Florida State had 81 yards in the first quarter, didn't score. Second quarter, they had 102 and 14 points. First half, they averaged 7 yards per play. Second half, they averaged 7.7. So maybe it's not as much of a wear down as it seemed to be perception wise. Again, fourth quarter though, they were averaging 8.2 yards per play. So maybe there is something to it. But I think that this was a game where it sort of displayed again the kind of team that Florida State is, and I think it's part of why we've seen this team be so hot cold. Florida State's a type of team that if they get in front of you, good luck. They went up early against Alabama. They went down, initially 7, and then they answered back, and then they went up. And they were able to play with leverage the rest of the game. And if this team gets up on you and can play with leverage, I think they're a really, really good football team. I just don't think that this is a team that plays very well from behind. And it's not just scheme. I think there's something to the way that this team plays in terms of confidence and other things. They just they hit a different stride eventually. And then you look at the other games that they've played. Virginia went up early thanks to a couple of, one bad call and then a couple of mistakes early on. So they went down against Virginia early. They went down against Miami early, Miami, Florida. They went down also against Pitt early. They went down against Stanford early. And when this team has been behind, they've not played well aside from that one possession where they were down one score against Alabama. And then in this one, they were able to keep Wake Forest from getting an early lead. And then once they actually were able to get up by 7, you could start to feel things change a little bit. And then once they got up by 14, it felt like this game was almost over even at that point. First of all, you're noticing that even when Wake Forest was moving the football, they were not really threatening to score the same way. It felt like everything was just labored for them. They could not really get a whole lot going. And obviously they had some opportunities. They had a couple long runs and, one longer pass play that got called back. They had a couple key drops. They found ways in some of those situations to make it worse than it was. And I mean, I think a couple of the key drops, this game changes dramatically if, you get a catch on the 4th down, if you get the catch upfield on the one that would have been a first down early in the game. They had some opportunities, and then the quarterbacks missed some open guys too. So I do want to be careful because there is a certain amount of iron pyrite here. There is a certain amount of fool's gold here if you want to really hold this up as a sign that, okay, FSU has clearly turned the corner. Because part of today's result was simply a matter of Robbie Ashford and Deshaun Purdy can't throw the football well enough to beat a decent secondary. And Wake Forest, in terms of wide receivers, don't catch it reliably enough to make you pay. There was some space, just like against Alabama, there was some space that Wake Forest could have taken advantage of, and they didn't. And then again, a couple of those mistakes, they were in the red zone and you had the fumble. You had the couple bigger plays that got called back. Those plays go the other way. And, if you're 14-14 going into the half, how different is this game? I mean, that's the question. But it wasn't. And what FSU then was able to do is essentially turn this into a crock-potting, an old-fashioned crock-potting, where, you don't just race out and dominate with, a run of, 4 or 5 straight drives where you score to open the game and you run the wheels off of a team. But, you go up by 7, then you go up by 14, another drive goes by, you get another stop, then you go up by 21. And then, just over time, you just keep wearing down your opponent. You keep moving the football just enough. You keep getting stops. And before too long, you look up and you're up 42-0. You're like, man, it doesn't feel like this was quite as dominant. But actually, yeah, this was a dominant performance. And again, 7.4 yards per play, 3.5 yards per play given up. That's domination. You also had, several sacks, 3 sacks for minus 17. You had 10 tackles for loss, got into the backfield some. So, all in all, pretty good. But the real question for me is this going to carry over to next week when you're playing at Clemson? And that Clemson team, obviously, really struggling, really doesn't feel very good about itself. Can you make that team quit? And I think the imperative in that environment against that team, with as fragile as things are in Clemson, South Carolina right now, if you're Mike Norvell, if you are Gus Malzahn, you're saying, what can we do to make sure we score on drive 1? What can we do to make sure that we're playing with a lead early in this game? Because if you can get up on them, that game, that Clemson team, all of a sudden, they start to press. They're also a front-running team. If they get up, that game could go sideways pretty quickly for Florida State. If you go up by them, if you go up on them, you go up by a couple scores, then you're in a position to come out of that game a winner. But that's a game you cannot fall behind, and that's a game you're going to have to play, I think, better on the back end, because Klubnik and those receivers can make you pay in ways that this Wake Forest team doesn't. That's the concern. What happens when you play against a competent quarterback who might get hot, against receivers that can find space and then cause problems? That's the real question. Now, one other thing that I want to kind of call up here is going back to the film session with me and Dontavius Jackson a couple weeks ago, when we were looking at the Pitt game. One of the things that we were noticing is just how sort of heavy-legged, especially the linebackers looked. Looking at 28 and 20 in particular in that game, we were wondering at the time, like, what are they doing? Like, are they running these guys too much? Because some of that, Florida State they looked slow against Pittsburgh. They looked slow against Miami in terms of the defense. They looked slow against Virginia. They didn't look especially fast against Syracuse. There's a team that looked slow and tired. And, I sort of wondered about that then, and he wondered about it too. And then this game, this was the freshest this team has looked since really the Alabama game, or at least the Kent State game. And, I wonder, I would love to see the GPS numbers, the workload numbers of especially the defense on this team. But I do wonder whether or not through that first several weeks, they maybe pushed him a little bit too hard, maybe had him on the field too much, or ran him too much in practice, or I don't know if maybe they had him lifting too many sets, or just too much volume. I don't know, but they looked like they had heavy legs in previous weeks. And then coming out of the bye, this team looked really fresh, much fresher than they'd looked in, since the first couple games of the season. And it does make me wonder. And, I got a message from a swimming coach who had noticed the same thing back around the Pitt game or whatever. And, he had similar wonders, similar questions. And, look, swimming coaches, those guys, they're right there with like cycling coaches in terms of being able to recognize periodization flaws. Like that's a big part of their job is essentially load management of their athletes, because so much of swimming is about, these micro gains, and you're pushing really hard to overreach in the right spaces, and you're not going to have your best times in certain meets, but you're loading up to be absolutely at your peak in the right meets. So much of what you do in those contexts is all about that. And, to have a swim coach noticing the same stuff has me going, there's something here, man. And, I have a hard time believing that that's something that's, just the S&C staff. I mean, those guys, they have the credentials. They should have the knowledge to make sure that everything is periodized just right, so that, the load is managed just right in terms of the weight room, in terms of what you're asking these guys to do. I don't think that this is one of those Josh Storms things, but I do wonder whether somewhere along the line, the combination of what Josh Storms was asking these guys to do, and maybe they're trying to give extra reps to guys in practice, or maybe they're running them a little bit, I don't know, in practice, to where the overall load ended up being just a little much. And I just don't know, but I do think that this team looked a lot fresher after coming off the bye than they had since really, against a Power 5 team or Power 4 team since the Alabama game. And that's something to keep an eye on against Clemson too, because, if they look like the team that played defensively against Miami or Florida, or against Virginia, or especially against Pitt, then, Clemson's probably going to have some success against them offensively. But if they look more like the defense that played against Alabama and against Wake Forest tonight, then, maybe that looks a little different against Clemson as well. There were a few guys on the defensive line tonight that showed burst that honestly they haven't shown in several weeks. I think 97, I think 93, 44. These are all guys that to me looked like they burst off the ball better than they have in a good while. And, that, I don't know. I thought Jerry Wilson looked quicker. I mean, the break on the ball he had downhill looked quicker. I mean, how much of that on defense is due to guys, feeling more comfortable with what they're asking them to do and triggering? I don't know, but that shouldn't matter for a defensive lineman. You're getting off the ball or you're not. I don't know. It's something to think about. And I'm going to see if I can investigate that a little bit. I've got some people to ask about this. I'd wondered about it a little bit, mentioned it a little bit before, but now after this one, I'm really starting to think there's something to it. And something to monitor over the course of the rest of the season as they go into the Clemson game and beyond. Now, of course, that NC State game continues to look scary. You look at the remainder of Florida State's schedule, and there's not a whole lot of gimmies on this schedule. And, that's something we talked about before the season, that this was a difficult schedule because you had going into the season, you felt you had four games against teams that have better rosters than you. And then a bunch of games against teams that can beat you. Not necessarily should, but absolutely can. And, that's not where you want to be. The next one you got a night game in Death Valley at Clemson. Then you got Virginia Tech, and that's a Virginia Tech team that's been, not all that good, but and in terms of a matchup for Florida State, I think that's a good matchup for Florida State. Then you got an NC State team with a hot quarterback. Right now, I'd favor NC State in that game. I mean, they just beat Georgia Tech and beat them pretty handily because they were able to run it all over them and throw it. And Florida State defensively, I think that might be a bad matchup. And then you got Florida, who's still good enough to push Georgia and to play, they played pretty good football against a really rough schedule. Question is, will they have quit by then? And I doubt it because that's your rivalry game. So where's this going to end up? I don't know. But, looks different coming out of the bye week, winning by 35. Should have been 42, but again, silly stuff late in the game. We'll see. We'll see what happens the rest of the way, but I don't know that there's really a whole lot left to talk about. I mean, Deuce Robinson, again, we mentioned he's a dude, and still work to do otherwise. I mean, I thought Tommy Castellanos looked a little healthier, still doesn't have the same level of spring that he did before the injury against Kent State. I'm not sure that he's going to get that back. It's just hard to have ankles fully recover to where you get your spring back in season. It just is. They still got some work to clean up. I did think they defended mesh better in this game. That's been a major problem over the course of the season. And it looked like in this game, they got it closer to right. Now the over the ball route was open a couple times because that middle backer that should be matching up with him was just missing him. Wasn't layering underneath that the way that he should, didn't match it well, but quarterbacks couldn't hit it. That's something that'll be there against Clemson. And again, if I'm Clemson, I'm repping the heck out of mesh. I'm, living in tight bunch and just bunch overall sets until Florida State shows me that they can defend it against somebody other than Wake Forest. But we'll see. Either way, for Florida State folks, it's a pretty good weekend, pretty good Saturday. So look, enjoy these when you get them. I think that in current college football, it's probably harder than ever to win consistently. So when you get them and when you get big wins in conference, when you win by a lot, you might as well enjoy it. Still a lot left this season. Talk to you all later in the week.
If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger,
Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all.
This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support. I made this.